There's this absolutely adorable meme making the rounds lately that confidently declares none of your problems are because someone else is a billionaire. It's the kind of thing that sounds profound if your understanding of wealth creation comes exclusively from Shark Tank. Let's explore why this sentiment isn't just wrong, but it's exactly backwards. In fact, if you're experiencing any of the myriad economic challenges facing regular people today, there's a pretty good chance a billionaire's wealth hoarding is at least partially to blame. First, let's talk about rent seeking, which is economic speak for making money by being a middleman who doesn't actually create anything new. Imagine if someone installed a toll booth on a public road that was already there and started charging people to use it. That's rent seeking in its purest form, extracting wealth without creating value. Now you might be thinking, but don't billionaires get rich by inventing amazing things? Sometimes, sure. But increasingly, the real money isn't in innovation. It's in finding new ways to insert yourself between people and the things they need, then charging them a premium for the privilege of access. Let's take a look at some pure examples of modern rent seeking, extracting wealth without creating new value. PBMs, which are pharmacy benefit managers who insert themselves as mandatory middlemen between drug manufacturers and pharmacies, then extract massive rebates while actually driving up drug prices and contributing nothing of value. Ticketmaster and Live Nation using their monopoly position to extract ever-increasing convenience fees on concert tickets while actively preventing venues from using other ticketing services. And lastly, patent trolls who buy up patents solely to sue actual producers and innovators, never intending to create or produce anything themselves. The common thread? None of these activities create new value. They just redistribute existing value upward. Consider this simple example. Imagine you own all the egg factories in a region. One day, you realize something interesting. If you shut down one factory, reducing the egg supply, the price of eggs goes up enough that you actually make more money selling fewer eggs at higher prices. Basic economics tells us this is bad for society because we're producing less while paying more. But as the owner, you don't care because your profits went up. Now, if eggs were produced by a diverse network of smaller farms and businesses, this kind of manipulation would be much harder to pull off. Plus, local owners who actually live in the communities they serve would feel the effects of their own price increases. But billionaires don't have to worry about egg prices because they're completely insulated from the consequences of their profit-maximizing decisions. Let's map out how billionaire wealth concentration actually does cause most of the economic problems people face today. Remember when people could afford houses? Well, let's talk about why you can't anymore, because it's even worse than you think. First, the actual construction of new homes is controlled by a few major companies, primarily D.R. Horton, Lennar Corporation, and Polk Group. These companies have figured out that they make more money by building fewer houses, leveraging basic monopoly behavior to restrict supply, drive up prices, and maximize profit. For example, why build 1,000 homes at $200,000 a piece when you can build 500 homes at $600,000 a piece and make more money with half the work? D.R. Horton, the largest home builder in the U.S., brought in $34.7 billion in revenue in 2024, followed closely by Lennar Corporation at $32.5 billion and Polk Group at around $13.7 billion. These companies dominate the market, and by carefully controlling the volume of new home construction, they shape supply and demand, ultimately influencing housing affordability. Then we've got the rental market, where companies are using sophisticated price-setting algorithms like RealPage to coordinate rental prices across entire regions. Look at Arizona, where massive corporate landlords use the same software to set optimal rents. Suddenly, every apartment complex decides to raise the prices at the same time. But remember, it's not collusion if an algorithm does it for you. But here's where it gets really fun. The complete disconnect between human money and institutional money. To a regular person, $100,000 is life-changing money. Hell, for most, even $10,000 is life-changing money. To an investment firm, that's a rounding error. When you're trying to buy a house, you're doing careful math about what you can afford based on your salary, savings, and mortgage rates. Meanwhile, BlackRock rolls in with billions in cash and could care less if they overpay by $50,000 per house, since they're playing a completely different game. And let's talk about those. When the Fed raises rates to cool the housing market, guess who that really affects? Not the massive investment firms with billions in cash, just regular people trying to buy a home with a mortgage. And now you're not just competing against companies with infinitely deeper pockets, but you're doing it with one hand tied behind your back because you have to worry about mortgage rates while they don't. Nothing says efficient market quite like making sure an entire generation can never build equity through home ownership. But hey, at least the rental algorithms are working as intended. Take a walk through your local supermarket. See all those different brand names? Adorable. What you're actually looking at is mostly P&G, Coca-Cola, and Nestle playing dress up. That quote-unquote choice between products is largely an illusion where you're picking between different labels owned by the same mega corporations who control basically everything. But let's talk about what's happening before food even reaches those shelves, because this is where it gets really dark. The meat industry shows us how consolidation absolutely wrecks both ends of the supply chain. Here's how the meat racket works. You've got farmers raising cattle and pigs, putting in all the work and taking all the risk. But when it comes time to process these animals, they're forced to deal with just 4 major meatpacking companies: Tyson Foods, JBS USA, Cargill, and National Beef Packing Company, which control about 85% of the US beef market. And here's the fun part. You can't just hold on to livestock indefinitely waiting for a better price. When animals reach slaughter weight, you've got to move them. The packers know this and they use it to their advantage. They set the prices and squeeze farmers who have no choice but to accept what they're offered. These companies dictate the entire supply chain, raking in massive profits while farmers are left struggling with rising costs and unpredictable margins. Market consolidation at its finest. So what's happening? Record numbers of pig and cattle farmers are just giving up. They literally can't make money anymore because the packers take all the profit margin. The farmers do all the work, take all the risk, and have to accept whatever price the packers feel like paying, because what else are they gonna do? Let their animals get too big for processing? Watch them die of old age? The same story plays out in eggs and dairy. A handful of companies control processing and distribution, allowing them to squeeze farmers on one end and customers on the other. When egg prices skyrocket, it's not because chicken farmers are getting rich. It's because Cal-Maine Foods, the largest egg producer in the US, has figured out that it can make more money by selling fewer eggs at a higher price, as evidenced by the 71% increase in sales in 2024 due to higher prices. The dairy industry operates the same way, with Dairy Farmers of America, Land O'Lakes, and Saputo Inc., controlling much of the milk, butter, and cheese supply. These companies dictate pricing structures, ensuring that while consumers pay more, farmers receive minimal compensation, all while the middlemen extract massive profits. So the next time someone tries to tell you that food inflation is just about supply and demand, remember, it's actually about a handful of companies controlling every step of the food supply chain and using that power to squeeze everyone else. The invisible hand of the market is actually just a few billionaires playing puppeteer with our food system. Let's talk about one of the most egregious examples of billionaire rent-seeking in action. Pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs for short. Never heard of them? That's by design. These middlemen have inserted themselves between every player in the prescription drug market, and they're making billions by making your healthcare worse. Here's how the scam works. PBMs are supposed to negotiate drug prices with pharmaceutical companies on behalf of insurance companies and pharmacies. Sounds reasonable, right? Except the 3 largest PBMs, CVS Caremark, Express Scripts, and Optum Rx, control about 80% of the market, and surprise, they also own their own pharmacy chains and mail-order pharmacies. It gets better. PBMs are mysteriously exempt from anti-kickback laws that apply to literally everyone else in healthcare. This means that they can and do demand quote-unquote rebates from drug manufacturers in exchange for putting their drugs on formularies, which are lists of drugs insurances will cover. The higher the list price of the drug, the bigger rebate that the PBM can pocket. So what happens? Drug companies jack up the list prices so that they can offer bigger rebates to the PBMs. The PBMs then get to keep the difference between what they pay for the drugs and what they can charge the insurance companies and pharmacies. It's a beautiful racket if you're a PBM executive, not so much if you need medicine to live. But wait, there's more. Since PBMs own their own pharmacies, they can and do manipulate reimbursement rates to drive independent pharmacies out of business. They'll reimburse their own pharmacies at one rate and competing pharmacies at a lower rate for the exact same drugs. Then they'll conveniently divert prescriptions to their own pharmacies. And it gets even more insidious because these PBMs aren't just middlemen, they're also health insurers. Thanks to Obamacare's medical loss ratio rule, insurers have a cap on how much profit they can make on premiums. But by owning the pharmacy, pharmacies, they found a loophole. They can funnel money through their PBM-owned pharmacies and count it as medical expense rather than profit, all while squeezing patients and independent pharmacists at both ends. The vertical integration allows them to circumvent regulations while consolidating more power, further driving up drug prices not because of manufacturing costs, but because of corporate greed. It sadly gets even more pervasive. Remember generic drugs, which should be saving everyone money? They often can't compete in this system. Why? Because generic manufacturers operate in thinner margins and can't offer the massive rebates that brand name manufacturers can. So PBMs can prefer expensive brand name drugs over cheaper generic drugs because they get to keep a bigger slice of a bigger pie. The result? Generic manufacturers get driven out of the market entirely. Remember when there was a shortage of basic antibiotics? This is why. We've created a system where it is more profitable to manipulate drug prices than to actually manufacture needed medications. First up, nuclear power. It's cleaner, more reliable, and can provide abundant energy, but we can't have that because reasons. Those reasons being that inconsistent, cheaper power doesn't generate the same profits as artificially constrained energy markets. The high upfront costs, regulatory hurdles, and the entrenched interests of energy companies mean that instead of a reliable, long-term solution, we get an intentionally fragile system propped up by short-term profits. And the inefficiency doesn't stop there. There's no real incentive to make the power grid itself more efficient. After all, power companies sell electricity, and if they generate more power, they can sell more power. Why would they want to make transmission more efficient when that would mean selling less energy for the same demand? Grid improvements like high-efficiency conductors, advanced transformers, and smart grid upgrades could reduce energy losses by 10 to 20%, but implementing them doesn't benefit the utility's bottom line. Since many utilities make money based on how much energy they sell, not how they distribute it, they have zero incentive to invest in efficiency. Even worse, modernizing the grid requires massive upfront investment, and utilities often can't guarantee an immediate return on that spending. They could implement dynamic line ratings, advanced power flow controls, and real-time optimization, but these don't immediately generate profit, so they don't happen. The regulatory framework doesn't force utilities to prioritize efficiency, and in many cases, they recover their costs through rate hikes rather than actual innovation. So instead of an efficient, optimized grid that delivers power reliably and affordably, we get an outdated, inefficient system where power companies rake in profits while ratepayers foot the bill for power companies' refusal to innovate. Just another example of how energy markets are structured to benefit corporations, not consumers. But here's the best one. Remember when gas prices shot up and caused inflation across the entire economy? Funny story, it turns out that major oil companies were caught actively colluding with the OPEC to restrict drilling and keep supplies tight. They literally chose not to produce more oil despite having the capability because higher prices meant bigger profits. This artificial supply constraint drove around 50% of recent inflation, affecting the price of literally everything that needs to be transported, which is everything. And it wasn't just speculation either. U.S. lawmakers and regulators launched actual investigations into this. The Federal Trade Commission, FTC, exposed communications between oil executives and OPEC, revealing that Scott Sheffield, former CEO of Pioneer Natural Resources, coordinated with the OPEC to inflate prices. The FTC even banned him from joining Exxon's board after approving Exxon's $60 billion acquisition of Pioneer. Meanwhile, companies like Hess Corporation and Occidental Petroleum were also scrutinized for their close ties with OPEC officials and alleged price-fixing efforts. The Senate called for a DOJ investigation into whether Big Oil engaged in illegal collusion to artificially raise crude oil prices. Did you know that Biden literally begged oil companies to drill more, even sending letters to major oil refiners in 2022 demanding they increase production to ease fuel costs? Their response? Nah. Despite record profits, the companies refused to boost supply, choosing to keep production tight and prices high, all while blaming market volatility. This leads to legislative efforts like the Big Oil Collusion Accountability Act, which aims to punish companies that collude with the OPEC by making them ineligible for federal drilling leases. And now, even Trump is telling them to drill more, and they're still saying, nah, money bro. Despite this pro-oil stance and policies aimed at making drilling easier, oil companies are still choosing to hold back production, prioritizing shareholder profits and stock buybacks over increasing supply. Turns out, corporate greed doesn't care who's in office. So yeah, they didn't just let inflation happen, they manufactured it. And as usual, consumers paid the price when oil giants raked in billions. Funny how that works. Here's where things really get fun. Having massive wealth makes it easier to accumulate even more wealth through rent-seeking opportunities. Got billions? Great. You can buy up competitors and consolidate markets, hire armies of lobbyists to shape regulations in your favor, weather any short-term losses while driving competitors out of business, control enough market share to manipulate prices, buy up media companies to shape public opinion, and break the law and pay the fines as a cost of doing business. It's the circle of wealth, and it just keeps spinning, concentrating more and more economic power in fewer and fewer hands. But it's not just that wealth gets concentrated that's the problem. It's that one of the most insidious aspects of billionaire wealth concentration is how it divorces economic decision-making from real-world consequences. When businesses were primarily owned by people who lived in and depended on their communities, there's at least some alignment between their interests and the public good. If you own the only grocery store in town and you live there too, you probably won't price gouge your neighbors, who are also your friends and family. But billionaires and massive corporations don't have these constraints. They can optimize purely for profit because they're insulated from the negative effects of their decisions. If prices go up, services get worse, or communities suffer, it doesn't affect them because they live in a different economic universe. When your business model is based on extracting value rather than creating it, you're not an innovator, you're a parasite with good PR. So the next time someone tries to tell you that billionaires aren't the cause of your economic woes, feel free to laugh. The system that creates and protects billionaires through concentrated ownership, market power, regulatory capture, and rent-seeking opportunities is precisely what makes everything from housing to healthcare to basic necessities increasingly unaffordable. The problems aren't just that billionaires have too much, it's that the system that allows for and encourages such extreme wealth concentration actively works against the interests of everyone else. Every time prices go up because of market manipulation, every time wages stay flat despite rising productivity, and every time basic services get worse while costing more, you can usually find a billionaire benefiting from the situation. So yes, if you've got 99 problems, there's a pretty good chance billionaires are behind most, if not all of them. And until we address the fundamental issues of market concentration, regulatory capture, and the political power of extreme wealth, those problems aren't going anywhere. But hey, at least the memes are free. For now.